The first thing he noticed was the silence. Not the ordinary quiet of a winter afternoon, but a heavy, hollow silence that made the crunch of dry leaves underfoot sound deafening. The park was nearly empty. The late afternoon sun hung low, stretching long, melancholy shadows across the benches, the paths, the bare trees. A thick wind blew, sharp and biting, rattling the skeletal branches as if the world itself were shivering. And then he saw her. She was sitting on one of those worn wooden benches, slumped forward slightly. Two small children huddled close against her, wrapped in a faded blanket that had seen better days. Recognition hit him with the force of a slap. His heart jumped, then sank, then raced uncontrollably. His mind froze. There she was, the woman who had once filled his apartment with laughter, who had painted his life with dreams, who had once promised him a world that now seemed impossibly distant. Her hair was pulled back carelessly. Her coat looked thin, her gloves worn at the fingertips. Her eyes, oh, her eyes, carried a weight he had never imagined. They were tired, so very tired. But beneath the exhaustion, beneath the silent resignation, there was something fierce, unbroken, a resilience that made his chest tighten. The children, two little mirrors of innocence, clutched her hand with tiny white-knuckled fingers. Their cheeks were pale from the cold, and every so often one of them would shiver, pressing closer against her for warmth. He froze. Not a move, not a word. Just froze. The air felt thick, heavy, as though the park itself were holding its breath. Memories he had buried for years rose up without warning. The laughter they had shared on lazy Sundays. The secret little jokes that only they understood. The promises he made, the dreams they had mapped out together under starry nights. And now all that was gone. He had imagined seeing her again in some controlled way, some grand, orchestrated moment where he could appear heroic, wealthy, unshaken. But this was raw, real, unforgiving. His hand twitched toward his phone. Not to call her, not yet. To gather courage. To decide if he should approach or simply turn around and disappear, as if she were a stranger on the street. A shiver ran down his spine. He felt small, almost inconsequential, despite all the wealth and power at his fingertips. She noticed him then. She looked up, and their eyes met. There was recognition, yes, but it was measured, controlled, careful. No warmth in her gaze, only caution. And maybe, just maybe, the faintest trace of hurt. The tension stretched between them, heavy as the winter sky. He opened his mouth, closed it again. Every word felt wrong. Every movement seemed inadequate. He could feel the children's eyes on him, wide and wary. They did not know him, yet somehow they sensed the weight he carried. He watched her tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, her jaw tight with resolve, as if she were bracing against the world itself. And then the truth hit him like ice water. The enormity of what he had lost. His pride, his wealth, his comfort, all the things he had spent a lifetime building. None of it could shield her. None of it could shield their children from the cold, from the harshness of reality, from the life she now led alone. A sharp pang of guilt pierced through him. Sharp, undeniable, lingering. He had walked away once, thinking his absence irrelevant, thinking his money could compensate for everything else. Now, in this frozen park, all that arrogance lay exposed, naked before the truth he could not escape. He watched as she adjusted the blanket, wrapping it tighter around the children. She leaned down and whispered something to them. Perhaps a story, perhaps encouragement. Her voice was soft, low, but firm, protective. He could not hear the words, but he could see the effect. The children smiled faintly, a small, fragile flicker of warmth in a bitter world. And still, he stood there, invisible and impotent. The guilt pressed in from every direction. He wanted to do something, anything, to help, but he knew, deep down, that nothing he could erase the years he had missed. Time seemed to stretch. The wind whipped against his face. A leaf skittered across the pavement, hitting his foot and breaking the spell momentarily. She turned slightly, checking her surroundings, making sure they were safe. The children leaned into her, silent, trusting, unaware of the history, the weight, the pain that hovered invisibly above them. He thought of all the luxurious homes he had owned, the expensive clothes, the cars, the money he could spend in a heartbeat. And he realized none of it could buy what she had: resilience, courage, love unshaken by absence. He finally took a step forward, then stopped. He wanted to call out, to say her name, to bridge the years and the distance with something, anything. But the words lodged in his throat. Pride and shame battled for dominance, and neither won. All he could do was watch. He could feel the sting of helplessness clawing at his chest. He could see, in every line of her face, in every gesture toward her children, the life she had forged in spite of him, in spite of the world, in spite of everything that had tried to break her. And yet, there was dignity there, a quiet, unyielding dignity. That realization was more powerful, more humiliating, more shattering than anything else. He had thought wealth and influence made him untouchable. He had thought he could control everything. But here, on a cold park bench, in a small, ordinary winter park, she was untouchable in a way he never could be. The shadows lengthened. The children yawned and leaned against her, exhaustion and cold weighing them down. She adjusted their blanket again, whispered words he could not hear, kissed their foreheads lightly, and then she glanced toward him briefly, just once, a flicker of acknowledgement, a ghost of the connection they had once shared. And then she turned away, focusing entirely on the children, leaving him confront the raw, uncomfortable truth. Some losses are permanent. Some consequences cannot be bought away. Some lessons must be learned in the silence of a park, in the cold, in the quiet shiver of winter. He stayed there for a long moment, watching them disappear down the path, the blanket swaying lightly with the children's small steps. The pang of guilt lingered, cold and sharp, but beneath it, an awakening stirred. He understood, for the first time in a lifetime of wealth and power, that what he had lost could never be replaced by money, by status, by comfort. He had lost something far more precious: human connection, love, presence. And he would never forget this park, this bench, this winter day. It was a reminder, a lesson, a confrontation he could not walk away from. Some things leave their mark not with words, but with silence, with the quiet, unshakable reality of truth. And in that silence, he realized something else, something he could not articulate, but would feel for the rest of his life. That dignity, courage, and love, true love, cannot be bought. They can only be witnessed, respected, and perhaps earned again through humility and change. He stepped closer, each footfall careful, measured, almost apologetic. The air between them seemed to thicken with each step, heavy with unspoken history. He tried to straighten his coat, adjust the scarf that felt suddenly inadequate against the cold, but it did nothing to ease the weight pressing down on his chest. His presence, he realized, was jarring, intrusive, almost predatory. The children tensed beside her, gripping her hands as though she might vanish if they let go. Their tiny bodies trembled, not just from the cold, but from instinctive wariness. Do you need help?" he asked, voice faltering, hesitant, the words sounding strange even to him. He felt ridiculous, exposed. She looked up at him, slowly, deliberately, her eyes sharpened, hardening into a shield he could not penetrate. "We're fine," she said, her tone calm, controlled, polite, but firm. There was no invitation, no warmth, just a clear boundary drawn in the cold air. He swallowed. The twins clung closer to her, little bodies pressing into her sides, their wide eyes darting nervously between him and the park's empty paths. He wanted to step back, to give them space, to vanish like a shadow. But something rooted him there, a mixture of guilt, longing, and the sharp sting of his own humiliation. A passerby walked slowly past, glancing briefly at the scene. The man saw him, the billionaire, the rich man in a threadbare coat, standing awkwardly before a woman who had nothing but courage and 2 children. Their eyes met for just a moment. Curiosity, maybe judgment, flickered in the stranger's gaze, but it was enough. The look pierced him like cold steel. All the wealth he had accumulated, the status, the power, it felt meaningless now, in this quiet, biting winter park, next to a woman surviving purely on grit, love, and determination. He was stripped bare. He tried again, fumbled through small talk, asking questions he immediately regretted. The weather is rough today, isn't it? He cleared his throat. You need somewhere warmer? His words sounded hollow even to him. She did not flinch. She did not respond. The silence was sharper than any reply could be. Each syllable he forced out echoed, awkward, distant, highlighting the gulf between his world and hers. He had imagined this reunion differently, grand, orchestrated, triumphant. Perhaps he had imagined himself heroically sweeping her and the children into his world, their past erased by wealth and charm. But reality had none of that softness, none of that illusion. She shifted slightly, wrapping the children's blanket tighter around them. "We manage," she said finally, her voice quiet but unwavering. There was no plea in her words, no hint of desperation. It was a statement, simple and unyielding. She began to explain, in soft, deliberate tones, how she had been surviving. Part-time jobs, odd shifts, rent piling up, bills stacking like mountains, the endless worry of raising 2 children alone. He listened, each word a hammer striking against the walls of his pride. Every story, every detail chipped away at the fortress he had built around his own ego. He felt it then, a deep, sinking realization. He had imagined power would be enough to bridge this gap. That wealth could erase absence. That money could undo the years of distance. But she did not need his money. She did not need his pity. What she had endured, was something far more powerful than anything he possessed. The park, the cold wind cutting across his face, the worn, tattered blanket. These were not inconveniences. They were symbols of a life he had ignored, a world that existed without him, a reality shaped by her strength. The children fidgeted, leaning into her, tugging at her sleeve, eyes wide and alert. He noticed the tiny hands gripping the blanket, the small, determined faces pressed together for warmth. He wanted to reach out, to intervene, to fix something. But the truth pressed down on him heavier than the winter air. Nothing needed to fix the years they had endured alone. His wealth was irrelevant. His charm was irrelevant. Even his love, however genuine, could not rewrite the story that had already been lived. He tried to smile, but it faltered halfway, failing to meet her eyes. He tried to make conversation, to bridge the distance, to fill the void of years with words that sounded hollow. Each sentence seemed clumsy, each attempt at empathy awkward, revealing the gap between who he had been and who she had become. She had not waited for him. She had not paused her life, her struggles, or her responsibilities. She had persevered, silently, fiercely, without the safety net of his wealth or his protection. A gust of wind blew, whipping her hair across her face. She brushed it away with a practiced motion, revealing the calm, unflinching expression she had perfected over months, perhaps years, of doing everything alone. There was no anger, no bitterness in her voice, only quiet pride and measured restraint. And in that moment, he understood something profoundly unsettling. He had imagined this reunion as a stage for redemption, a chance for heroism, a moment of triumphant reconciliation. But life was not a stage. Life was real, raw, and the reality before him. Her dignity in the face of struggle, her relentless care for her children, was more powerful than any triumph he could imagine. The children yawned, rubbing their eyes, exhausted from the cold and from the weight of the world they did not fully understand. She adjusted the blanket once more, her hands gentle, careful, protective. She whispered something to them, a small, comforting phrase, and they nestled closer. He could not hear the words, but the effect was unmistakable. Calm, trust, safety. In that moment, the enormity of his own inadequacy settled heavily on his shoulders. He could not protect them. He could not erase the years of absence. He could only stand there, humiliated by his own limitations, by the stark contrast between his wealth and her resilience. The park felt colder than ever, the shadows stretching longer, heavier. He wanted to say something meaningful, profound, to bridge the silence. But what words could capture this chasm? What phrase could condense guilt, love, pride, and all at once? He realized painfully that there were no words, only presence. And even that felt intrusive, inadequate, insufficient. He wanted desperately to do something, anything, to ease the cold, to shield the children from the reality he had once ignored. But all he could do was watch, powerless, as the wind swept across the park, as the shadows lengthened, as she protected them with nothing but her body, her voice, and her indomitable spirit. Time passed slowly. Each second stretched, heavy with the weight of years of absence, of mistakes he could not undo. And still, she spoke softly to the children, guiding, comforting, sustaining. He felt the sting of humiliation, the knowledge that all his wealth, all his influence, all his pride, was meaningless in the face of their lived reality. And yet, amid that sting, a deeper understanding began to stir. He had underestimated her. He had underestimated their resilience. He had misunderstood the true meaning of strength, in quite the same way again. The park was quiet again, except for the soft whisper wind through bare branches, the small shuffle of tiny feet, and the rhythm of her voice steady and strong. He knew he could not stay forever. But he also knew that the image would be seared into his mind, a lesson he could not escape. Wealth, power, pride, they were fleeting. Resilience, courage, love, and dignity, these endured. And she had them in abundance. He stepped back, slowly, reluctantly, giving them space, watching the shadows fall longer, feeling the cold seep deeper and understanding, with painful clarity, that humility and respect were more valuable than anything money could buy. He walked away then, not triumphant, not heroic, but changed. And he knew he would never see the world in quite the same way again. He stayed frozen, unable to move, as she reached into the fold of her coat and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. It looked ordinary at first, but the way she handled it, with careful fingers, deliberate and steady, made him sense its weight before he even saw the words. The children squirmed lightly on her lap, curious, wide-eyed, but they trusted her implicitly. She unfolded the paper and read aloud softly, her voice calm, precise, yet filled with an energy he could not ignore. The note was from the local community center where she had been volunteering, a place he had never imagined existed in her life, a place she had somehow carved out amid the chaos, the cold, the endless struggle. His eyes followed every movement. The note described small victories, tiny triumphs of children learning, growing, finding confidence. They were thriving, it said, despite every obstacle, every hardship. And then, she did something he had never anticipated. She handed him another folded letter. This one, clearly different, wore at the edges as if it had traveled time and memory itself. He unfolded it slowly, hands trembling slightly, and recognized the handwriting immediately. It was from one of the children. The words inside were simple, childish, yet powerful. A thank you for a donation he didn't even remember making years ago. A small act that had now rippled into something far greater than he had imagined. Something inside him shifted. Something he could not name. Something that twisted and tightened and loosened all at once. The power he had always assumed he held, the authority, the money, the influence, felt suddenly hollow, meaningless. Here she was, standing before him, teaching life and courage without any expectation of reward. She did not beg. She did not plead. She did not appeal to his pride or his wealth. She simply existed, resilient, unstoppable, holding her world together with nothing but her own strength and determination. He realized then, with a slow, almost painful clarity, that the power dynamic had been reversed. He had imagined himself the arbiter, the one who could lift, fix, or control. But now he understood the truth. She had always been in control, in ways he had never appreciated. Every step she had taken to protect those children, every night she had spent worrying, every sacrifice she had made silently, it all demonstrated a strength that dwarfed his own. His money, his mansion, his name, none of it mattered here. She wielded the true currency of life, courage, resilience, and unwavering love. The twins, innocent and unaware of the weight of this moment, looked up at her and then at him. Their tiny faces were open, unguarded, free from the history that hung between him and their mother. And yet in their bright, trusting eyes, he saw the impact of her efforts, the lessons she had imparted, the care she had poured into their lives despite the odds. It was a reversal he could not have orchestrated, a humbling he had never experienced before. The realization burned hotter than embarrassment, pricked sharper than shame. His pride, his past arrogance, his absence, all of it crumbled under the simple, undeniable weight of their humanity. She smiled faintly, but it was not a smile for him. It was a smile for them, for the life she had built, for the small victories she had earned and cherished. Her gaze, calm and steady, met his for a brief instant. It was neither an invitation nor a rebuke. It was recognition. And in that recognition, he understood the depth of his failures. He had been blind, so certain that wealth and presence could compensate for years of neglect. And now he saw the truth. Love, dignity, and strength could never be replaced by money, by status, by pride. He wanted to speak, to say something profound, but the words failed him. What could he say that would capture the humility, the awe, the raw, electric understanding that surged through him? How could he convey the lessons learned not through lectures or luxury, but through the quiet, unyielding power of a woman surviving and thriving, shaping her children's lives in the face of everything he had taken for granted? The park seemed to shrink. The wind softened, and in the small bubble of space that contained her and the twins, he realized he had entered a world where his usual measures of success no longer applied. The letter felt heavy in his hands, yet it was lighter than any of the burdens he carried. The words of a child, simple, pure, and honest, had pierced him deeper than any confrontation could. He read them again, slower this time, allowing their meaning to sink in fully. Gratitude, acknowledgement, recognition of something he had done long ago, yet now magnified into a seed of hope. And it was her who had nurtured it, her who had allowed it to grow, her who had turned a small act into a lifeline of learning, of growth, of survival. He had thought himself the teacher, the benefactor, the savior, but he realized now that he was a student, humbled by the quiet, unshakable force of her life. The twins giggled softly, leaning against her shoulders, and she laughed quietly in return. It was a sound both ordinary and miraculous. He watched them, and the laughter cut through the tension, through the cold, through the weight of all the years lost. And he felt something unfamiliar, admiration, awe, respect, not for her beauty, not for her past connection to him, not for what she had once been in his life, but for the woman she had become, for the mother she was, for the courage she embodied every single day without acknowledgement, without applause. Time seemed to stand still. The wind whispered through the trees, the shadows stretched longer, but in that moment, everything else faded. He saw what he had missed, what he had underestimated, and he understood the moral in the quietest, most undeniable way. Strength is measured not by wealth or authority, but by resilience, by courage, by the ability to rise when no one else is watching, to teach, to nurture, to survive. She had taught him more in these few minutes than he had ever learned in all his boardrooms, all his bank accounts, all his luxury. He folded the letter carefully, more out of reverence than necessity, and met her eyes again. There was no resentment, no claim, only acknowledgement. And in that moment, he knew he would never look at power, wealth, or privilege the same way again. His world had shifted on a quiet, ordinary park bench. His assumptions, his arrogance, his pride, all had been upended, not through confrontation, but through quiet, resilient dignity. The children ran ahead a few steps, their laughter trailing behind them like sunlight in the cold. She called him back gently, her voice firm yet nurturing, and he stayed, silent, absorbing it all. The weight of realization, the reversal of power, the humbling of a lifetime. It all pressed on him, heavy but necessary. He would leave this park a different man. Not just a man with wealth, not just a man with regrets, but a man awakened to the truth that dignity, perseverance, and love are the most valuable forces in the world. And sometimes those forces are found where we least expect them. In quiet acts, in unseen struggles, in the unbroken spirit of those who have been underestimated all their lives. He walked slowly away from the park bench, each step heavy with thought, heavy with regret, heavy with new awareness that weighed more than any sum of money he had ever earned. The wind cut across his face, cold and unforgiving, but he barely noticed. His heart pounded in his chest, a relentless drumbeat, reminding him of everything he had lost and everything he had taken for granted. The park seemed quieter now, as if it, too, were holding its breath, waiting for him to understand something he refused to see for far too long. The benches, the trees, the path, all seemed imbued with truth he could not escape. Welcomed not by love, respect, or dignity. All the fortunes he had amassed, the names, the accolades, The power suddenly felt hollow in the face of a life built on courage, integrity, and unwavering commitment to others. He thought of her. He thought of the way she carried herself through every struggle, every hardship, with a calm and unbroken strength he could never have imagined. She had never asked for his help. She had never depended on him. She had lived, thrived, and loved despite him, despite the absence that had once seemed irrelevant, despite the world that tried to push her down. And those children, the twins, innocent, resilient, filled with potential and light, they had been shaped by her love, her sacrifice, her dedication. His mind replayed the images of them, shivering but safe under her blanket, smiling faintly despite everything, growing and learning and thriving in a way he had never imagined possible. Weeks passed, and he did not forget. He could not forget. The memory haunted him, a quiet voice reminding him of the humility he had been forced to confront. He began to act quietly, discreetly, with no need for acknowledgement, no desire for applause. He supported the community center where she volunteered, ensuring the children had resources, opportunities, and guidance. But he never reached out to reclaim what he had once lost with her. He understood now that some bridges could not be rebuilt through wealth, that some mistakes could not be erased with money, respect could not be purchased, and redemption could not be demanded. It had to be earned, and it had to be given freely. He thought about the irony of it all. He had imagined himself the hero, the benefactor, the one who could swoop in and save her and the children from hardship. But in reality, he had been the one who needed saving, not from poverty or struggle, but from arrogance, from illusion of power, from the belief that his wealth made him superior. She had shown him the truth, not with confrontation or anger, but with life itself. Quiet courage, steady perseverance, and the kind of love that reshapes not only those who receive it, but those who witness it. He had been humbled in ways that money could never replicate, in ways that boardrooms and mansions and prestige could never teach. He remembered the letter from the child, the small note of gratitude that pierced him deeper than any conversation, any apology, any plea ever could. That letter had been a mirror, reflecting the consequences of his absence and the impact of her determination. It was simple yet profound, and it carried more weight than any donation, any gesture he could make now. It had reminded him that life's true currency is not dollars, it is dignity, it is compassion. It is the courage to rise above hardship and to lift others in the process. He had been blind to this truth for far too long, but now it shone brighter than the cold winter sun. Impossible to ignore. He walked past the park benches, past the trees swaying gently in the wind, and realized that every step he took was lighter, freer, because he carried a new understanding with him. The past could not be undone, but the future could be shaped. He could not reclaim the love he had lost, but he could honor it through respect, through action, through the choices he made from this day forward. And perhaps that, more than anything, was the true measure of redemption. Not taking back what he had lost, but giving freely what he had learned. Humility, understanding, and a commitment to support without expectation. He imagined her face again, calm, resolute, carrying the weight of the world without faltering. He imagined the twins, laughing softly despite adversity, their eyes bright with potential. And he understood that they had taught him more than he could have ever taught them. He had learned what true strength looked like. He had learned that dignity could not be bought, that courage could not be commanded, that love required presence and sacrifice, not just wealth. He had been schooled not in money or influence, but in life itself. The wind swept to the park one last time, and he paused, taking it all in. He knew he would never see the world the same way again. Every mansion, every luxury car, every accolade now seemed insignificant compared to the quiet heroism of a woman who refused to be broken, who built a life of meaning from the fragments he had left behind. He had been humbled, he had been transformed, and he carried with him a lesson that would last longer than any fortune he could leave behind. True wealth lies in compassion, in resilience, in the courage to face hardship and still rise. He thought of the life ahead, of the ways he could act without fanfare, of the small but meaningful steps he could take to support those who were overlooked, underestimated, or undervalued. It was not enough to feel regret. It was not enough to acknowledge mistakes. Action had to follow understanding, and he began to see the subtle ways he could make amends. Not through domination or control, not through showy gestures, but through quiet, consistent, meaningful support. The community center became a symbol, not just of his financial assistance, but of his new perspective. He would give without demanding acknowledgement. He would respect without expectation. He would serve without arrogance. The moral of it settled in him slowly, fully, irrevocably. Life's truest lessons are rarely taught in comfort. They are found in the cold, in moments of humility, in encounters that shatter pride and demand reflection. The woman on the bench, the children she nurtured, the quiet resilience they displayed, all of it transformed him more than any wealth or status ever could. He had been a student in a classroom he had never wanted to enter, learning lessons he had avoided his whole life. And now, he carried them forward, aware, attentive, changed. He turned back for a moment, glancing at the path he had walked, imagining her there, smiling faintly at her children, steady and unbroken. And he knew that some victories are invisible, some triumphs are silent, and some lessons are life-altering. Redemption is not possession. It is respect. It is action born from understanding. It is a recognition that true wealth is measured not in dollars, but in dignity, in courage, and in the quiet, unwavering love that survives against all odds. He walked on, leaving the part behind, carrying a heart humbled, a mind awakened, and a soul transformed. And though the chill of winter clung to his coat and the memory of his own failures lingered in every step, he felt a warmth that could not be bought, a light that could not be measured, and a lesson that will remain with him forever. The strongest, most powerful people are not those with wealth, but those who persevere with courage, dignity, and love. And that sometimes the world's quiet heroes are the ones who teach the loudest lessons.